Hello there, folks, and welcome to the Jefferson Educational Society's Global Summit 12 presentation of Extraterrestrial Life. Are we the sharpest cookies in the jar? I'm Ben Speggen. I'm the Vice President at the JES. In this program, which originally aired live on Wednesday, May 12th, 2021, Dr. Avi Loeb, renowned astronomer, discussed his acclaimed recently released book, Extraterrestrial, the First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, which makes a compelling case that we may, in fact, not be alone. Before we get to the program, I'd like to thank all of our event sponsors, Erie Insurance, Erie News Now, the Erie County Gaming Revenue Authority, WQLN Public Media, and the American Tapestry Project, and our Global Summit event partner, the City Club of Cleveland. And I'd like to remind you that you can access additional programs to stream on demand at jeserie.org, where you'll also find a wide range of publications from reports, essays, timely writings, and more. And be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date with all JES content. And now, here's Extraterrestrial Life. Are we the sharpest cookies in the jar?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ferki Faradi, and I am the president of the Jefferson Educational Society. And it is my distinct honor to welcome you to this third talk of Global Summit 12. And what a summit it has already been. There are 11 more talks after tonight, so please attend as many as you can. I do want to thank our team, our sponsors, the board of directors, and the chairman, Mr. Steve Scully, for bringing a world-class conference to Erie, Pennsylvania. Tonight's guest, Dr. Abraham Avi Loeb, is a friend of the Jefferson and an inspiration to the world through his teachings, writings, leadership, and sheer brilliance over the last few decades. Many of you know the basics. Dr. Loeb earned his Ph.D. in physics at the age of 24. He leads Harvard's astronomy department and black hole initiative. And most recently, he directs the Institute for Theory and Computation with the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Wow. But it is his many books that have captured the imagination of Americans and the world. His most recent book, titled Extraterrestrial. In it, he asks the question, are we the smartest cookie in a jar? He adds, we might be a form of life as primitive and common in the cosmos as ants are in a kitchen. If so, he concludes, we can learn a lot from others out there. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of the world's leading minds, Dr. Avi Loeb. And now I turn it over to my colleague and Vice President of the Jefferson Society, Mr. Ben Speggen. Ben?
So thank you, Dr. Faradi, and thanks again to Erie Insurance and to all of our sponsors and our event partner, the City Club of Cleveland, for helping make tonight's event and the rest of the Global Summit 12 lineup all possible. Dr. Loeb, welcome back to the JES Global Summit stage. Dr. Loeb, you are muted.
Okay.
Wonderful. We hear you now, sir.
Yeah. Thank you so much for hosting me. It's too bad that we can't meet in person. I enjoyed very much my previous visit, and I hope to see you in person when we are allowed to congregate again. So let me share my screen, and what I will do is walk you through some slides. I will skip others so that we will have plenty of time for questions. And so you will see me scrolling across some of the slides. But the discussion today will focus around my new book, Extraterrestrial, that you see in the middle here. And if I had to summarize it in one sentence, I would say, when you're not ready to find exceptional things, you will never discover them. And I wrote a Scientific American commentary about it about half a year ago. What you see on the right is a textbook that I'm about to publish in a couple of months that lays out the scientific foundation for the search for life. And I hope that scientists will use it, that it will become mainstream. What you see on the left side of this slide is a photograph of a picture that was hung on the Berlin Brandenburg Academy of Science and Technology, Science and Humanities hall taken by Herlinda Quilbel, a photographer from Germany that came to my office and asked me to write on the palm of my hand the most important question that I can think of in the context of modern science. And I wrote, "Are we alone?" So if I had to summarize what I've learned over the past few decades as an astronomer, I would summarize it with a sense of modesty. And the reason is that we are born into this world like actors being put on a stage without a script. And the first thing we notice when we observe the universe is that the stage is huge. It's 10 to the power 26, 1 with 26 zeros, larger than the size of our body. And moreover, the play has been going on for a long while before we came to the scene. In fact, 13.8 billion years. We've been around only over the past tiny bit, one part in 100 million of cosmic history. So how can we think that the play is about us? If you go back to ancient history, the Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that we're at the center of the world. Well, that makes no sense. We cannot be central players if we arrive at the end of the play and the stage is so huge. Moreover, we now know that about half of all the sun-like stars have a planet like the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So there are more habitable Earths in the observable volume of the universe than the numbers of grains of sand on all beaches on Earth. And an emperor or a king, like the one depicted in the middle of this slide, resembles an ant that hugs a single grain of sand on the landscape of a huge beach. It's not very impressive, but I can understand where it's coming from. When I watched my daughters when they were young, they tended to think the world centers on them, that they are the smartest. But then when they went to the kindergarten, they realized they are smarter kids. And of course, if I were to ask them, they would prefer to stay at home and maintain their illusion. So we, as a civilization, still has to mature, because many of us believe that we are unique and special, the smartest. We are probably not the sharpest cookies in the jar. And what I mean by the jar is the Milky Way galaxy. And the reason I say that is that when we look at the news every day, we see that humans make a lot of mistakes. We are wasting a lot of resources on fighting each other, feeling superior relative to each other. All of this makes very little sense when you look at the big picture, at the universe. And Earth itself is our home, but not very long. Eventually, there would be all kinds of catastrophes that will force us to move away from Earth. Currently, all our eggs are in one basket. And speaking about going to space, let me say a few words about my personal history, which is also described in the book. I was born on a farm. You can see me at a very young age on the top left, at age 7 or so. And the second photo, you can see me collecting eggs every afternoon from the chickens that we had. I used to drive a tractor to the hills of the village and read philosophy books. Philosophy was really my passion because it addresses the most fundamental questions we have. But circumstances led me to astrophysics, and I ended up realizing that even though it was an arranged marriage, I'm actually married to my true love, because in astrophysics, we can address fundamental questions using the scientific method. And speaking about that, in May 2015, a dark limousine parked in front of the Center for Astrophysics at Harvard, and out of it came an entrepreneur from Silicon Valley named Yuri Milner. He came to my office, sat on the sofa, and asked me whether I'm willing to lead a project that will visit the nearest star within his lifetime, meaning 20 years. And for that to happen, you needed a spacecraft that moves at a fifth of the speed of light, because the nearest star is 4 light years away. It takes light 4 years to get there. And so I realized that's 1,000 times faster than all the spacecraft that we have launched before. Sort of like the factor of 1,000 difference between spacecrafts and cars. So that's very challenging. How do we do that? And of course, the solar system is pretty large. And it turns out the nearest star is Proxima Centauri. It has a habitable planet next to it at the right distance. It's actually a dwarf star, and the planet faces the star with the same side at all times. So it has a permanent day side and a permanent night side. And my daughters say, if we ever go there, they want to live on the strip that separates these two sides, because there you can see the sunset forever. So how do we get there? The technology we recommended is that of a light sail, basically a thin film of material being pushed by a powerful beam of light, a laser, 100 gigawatt, shining for a few minutes and pushing 1 gram to a fifth of the speed of light across a distance that is 5 times the distance to the moon. And this sail can be equipped with a tiny camera, navigation device, and communication device, the kind of electronics you find on a cell phone. And so this technology includes an array of lasers shining on a light sail and pushing it away from Earth for a few minutes in the direction of the nearest star. Then the journey takes about 20 years, and a photograph is sent back to Earth. The fundamental question is, are we the smartest kid on the block? So we are not just looking for primitive life. More important is to find out whether there is intelligent life. And quite likely, the Earth did not bake the best cake out of the chemical ingredients that existed on it. But we should search rather than have a prejudice. And searching in our backyard is the easiest. Turns out that in 2017, the first object that came from outside the solar system was spotted near Earth by a telescope in Hawaii. It was given the name Oumuamua, which means a scout in the Hawaiian language. You can see this object circled in blue in this image. It came from a very special frame of reference, which is the local galactic parking lot, sort of the frame you get to when you average the motions of all the stars in the vicinity of the sun. Only 1 in 500 stars is at rest in that frame. But the sun gave it a kick, like a giant ship that bumps into a buoy at rest on the surface of the ocean. And this object looked weird. It didn't have a cometary tail, so it was definitely not a comet coming from another star. We knew that it came from outside the solar system because it was moving too fast to be bound to the sun. And it's the amount of sunlight that it reflected changed by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling, spinning every 8 hours. And that meant that it had an extreme shape, most likely flat, pancake shape. And so it had a number of strange properties. The most strange among them was the excess push that it exhibited away from the sun, in addition to the force of gravity that the sun exerted on it. And this push could be explained as the result of a reflection of sunlight, because there was no cometary tail to explain this push by the rocket effect. And so that suggested that maybe it's a light sail. But nature doesn't make light sails. So then it has to be artificially produced. There were some other proposals made by scientists trying to explain it from a natural origin, but all of them invoked something that we've never seen before, and each and every one of them had a major problem. The ideas were like a cloud of dust particles, or a hydrogen iceberg, or a nitrogen iceberg, the size of a football field. And all of them had major problems that we can discuss in the Q&A. So the simple way to think of this is like walking on the beach, and most of the time you see rocks that are naturally produced, but every now and then you might see a plastic bottle. And Oumuamua may have been a plastic bottle indicating that there is a civilization out there. We've seen another object that exhibited a push away from the sun without a cometary tail. It was given the name 2020 SO. Turned out to be the relic of a rocket booster that was launched in 1966. And this one had thin walls, and it was pushed away from the sun without showing a cometary tail. We know that we produced it artificially. The question is, who produced Oumuamua? So the fundamental question is whether the object is natural or artificial in origin. And of course, the way to tell is by taking a photograph. We couldn't take a photograph of Oumuamua because it moved away from us too fast, and we couldn't really catch up with it. And moreover, the telescopes on Earth could not resolve it. It was too far away. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book. I wouldn't need to write the book if we had a photograph. And here you can see a photograph taken by the OSIRIS-REx spacecraft that landed on the asteroid Bennu. And just imagine us landing on an artificial piece of equipment. We may be able to read off the label made on planet X. We could also import the technology to Earth, and just think how much money one can make by bringing in a technology that otherwise would take us 1,000,000 years to develop ourselves. So there are several ways to look for relics from other civilizations, in addition to finding pieces of equipment in space, like Voyager 1, Voyager 2 that we launched, or New Horizons. You can also look for industrial pollution in the atmospheres of planets. You can look for photovoltaic cells on the surface of a planet. You can look for city lights on the night side of a planet, or for satellites hovering over its surface, or for a beam of light that sweeps across the sky and is used to propel light sails. Lots of ways. You don't need actually a laser to propel light sails. You can imagine parking them in the vicinity of a star that is about to explode. And one can show that the flash of light will carry those sails close to the speed of light. So that flash of light resembles a giant ocean wave carrying surfers on the beaches of Hawaii. And another metaphor would be dandelion seeds that you see on the right here, carried by the wind. Enrico Fermi asked the paradox, where is everybody? But to me, that sounds presumptuous because it means that we must be interesting. I don't think so. I think probably there are plenty of technological civilizations that existed before us. And therefore, we do not deserve a special visit. Nobody would come and party in our backyard. But we should search. And I call it space archaeology. We could look for relics left behind by civilizations that are already dead. And of course, the importance of finding them is that it could teach our civilization an important lesson. If they perished as a result of misbehaving, we can get our act together and avoid a similar fate. Thank you. I'll be glad to answer any question you have.
Dr. Loeb, I want to thank you. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us for this conversation, taking a look at your book, Extraterrestrial, the First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth. Again, reminding people that it's available 28 editions, 25 different languages, and a bestseller in multiple countries. So congratulations on getting this out, those 66,000 words. So we thank you for that. Thank you for sharing some of them with us here tonight. I'd like to start where you started, and that's your community farm in Israel. It received such a fond treatment, fond memories and mentioning in your book. I'm wondering, because I number one don't know a lot of astronomers, but those that I do, I don't know many who began as a farmer. And my first job was working on a farm growing up, and I know that was influential to me. I'm wondering how that experience affected your trajectory. Growing up on a farm, you mentioned driving out to read philosophy books, but being on that farm, how did that impact you as a scientist and as a researcher?
Well, the biggest effect it had on me is appreciating nature and being connected to nature more than people. Um, and I see science as a dialogue with nature. We have to listen to the evidence and not make a monologue out of it. So many of my colleagues in academia think of science as a way of elevating their image, showing that they are smart, so that they can get honors and awards. To me, that's not the goal. The goal is not to promote yourself. It's not about us. It's about nature, trying to figure it out. And my connection with nature started as a young boy. And in fact, I don't have any account on social media. I promised my wife that I will not have such an account. And I'm very glad that I don't, because it allows me to think independently. I don't care how many likes I have on Twitter. I just follow the evidence. The way basketball coaches advise their team members, keep your eyes on the ball, which is the evidence in the case of science, and not on the audience. The audience is less relevant. So that's an important lesson. And every morning I jog at around 5 a.m. and enjoy the company of ducks, birds, rabbits, and wild turkeys. And it rejuvenates me for the day. And every morning the sunrise is different. And I just love nature the way it is. And I cannot say the same about the company of people. Many times it's a mixed bag.
I want to get into other academics and scientists in a minute, and talk about some of the problems that you've discussed in other interviews in science. But on that thought of the dialogue with nature, and I've heard you say that before. I've read that in other interviews, and one of the things you've said as well is nature isn't supposed to make us happy or satisfied or proud of ourselves. Nature is whatever it is. To someone who's trying to force a monologue with nature and not accept that dialogue, what do you do to coach them to get them to listen to nature? How do you welcome them into the conversation and tell them to maybe speak less and listen more?
Right. It's much easier when you deal with young people. So, for example, a couple of hours ago, I spoke to young kids, ages 7 to 12. And it was really fascinating because you can tell that they don't have an agenda. They don't have a prejudice, no baggage. They are not attached to their egos, and they ask very smart questions. Now, something bad happens when these kids become tenured professors in academia. I was asked by the Harvard Gazette, what is the one thing I would like to change about the world? And I said, I would like my colleagues to behave more like kids, because kids try to learn about the world. When you look at babies, you think, oh, they're not very smart because they take an object, turn it around and look at it from different directions. Turns out this is the smart thing to do if you want to learn about the object. And in fact, when people develop artificial intelligence and robotics, they realize that if they design a robot for a particular task, when the circumstances change, the robot doesn't know how to handle it because it was trained to do one thing. And a baby is much more skillful at that. So actually looking at things from different directions and allowing multiple opinions, multiple views, and it's a way of learning. And if you're not afraid of making mistakes, that's an extremely important skill, because then you can explore and discover new things. But unfortunately, if your goal is to demonstrate that you are smart, to elevate your image so you get honors and awards, then you avoid taking risks. And that suppresses innovation. And in particular, one trick that some of my colleagues adopt is to work on a problem that cannot be tested by experiments. So then you can do mathematical gymnastics, you can talk about extra dimensions, you can talk about the multiverse, you can talk about string theory. And as long as there is no experiment that will test those ideas in your lifetime, you are very protected. You just need to make sure that you demonstrate that you're smart with your mathematical skills. But the point is, first of all, that's not the goal. You may be wasting your life on an idea that has no merit, doesn't describe the world. So what's the point? And you know, for example, Aristotle, that argued that we are at the center of the world, had a beautiful model, very sophisticated, with spheres around us. It just turned out that the model is wrong. The Earth moves around the sun. And you know, speaking about Oumuamua as an artificial object, that doesn't require very fancy math, but just think about the implications that that would carry if it's true. And the point is, you know, we are not in the business of talking about ourselves as physicists, as scientists. We're in the business of talking about nature. And you know, it's easier for me to convey that message to young people. But the problem that I face is when they see the response of the community, the kind of views I express, they start to worry, because I have tenure. I have nothing to lose, you know, in terms of job security. But the young people have to calculate whether they would deviate from the box, whether they would have out of the box ideas, whether they would innovate, because if they dare to do that, they will be attacked in exactly the same fashion. So to me, that's the most dangerous part. All the spectators, the young people that are watching this and watching the pushback for no good reason, you know, it makes for a culture that is less risk-taking, less innovative, and therefore less likely to make discoveries. I can give you many examples where ideas that turned out right were for decades denied by the mainstream, and that basically slowed down progress. But for every baby that was eventually born after 40 years or so, and there are many of those in modern science, there must be a lot of babies, and by that I mean ideas, that were suppressed altogether, that never saw the light of the day, because even today they're being dismissed and ridiculed.
And it seems like that's two heads of a multi-headed problem. Is number one, risk aversion out of fear of not being able to advance one's career. But then I think the other risk that I hear you talking about is playing to what can get a lot of oxygen and limelight because it's popular, but yet we're not going to be able to solve it or look at it. Things like the examples you gave, the multiverse and string theory. So I want to get to in a minute, how do we start to solve these problems in science? But you speak so well in your book, you write so well in your book about retaining that childlike wonder that you just started with, and talking about how we see that in younger people and we tend to lose that as we get older. And I think that's one of the problems we can get into in a second. But I'd like to hear about how you held on to that childlike wonder after all of these years, because you've been at it now for several decades working in your field, and yet you still have that. So how have you retained it? How do you coach people to keep it?
Yeah, so I used a very simple trick. I didn't subscribe to social media. And I basically try to be as sincere and as straightforward as possible. Now, you might find that to be a contradiction, because I was the longest serving chair in the astronomy department at Harvard University for 9 years. And but right at the beginning, you know, I was always straightforward. What you see is what you get. And I'm telling you what I think. And I'm telling you all the facts. I never manipulate people. I never hide things behind their back. And, you know, at first it looked as if, well, this is not a useful strategy for managing an organization. But it turned out that it's actually a very helpful strategy, because then people never suspect that you're hiding something from them, that you're manipulating, and they cooperate with you. And I became quite popular as a leader of the astronomy department. And I managed to pursue a lot of important goals or guiding principles. For example, trying to improve the diversity in the department, bringing women and minorities. And 80% of my students over the last decade were women. Doing that was possible because I was completely transparent in the way and the reason I appreciate, for example, people that are not represented in STEM is because I came from this unusual path. And I know that I was lucky to have some gatekeepers that allowed me in at some critical junctures. And there must be many more like me that have similar skills to the ones I have that just didn't make it. And what I'm trying to do is help them, those that come from backgrounds that are not as advantageous as others.
In your presentation, you talked about falling in love with philosophy and then meeting physics, and I think you used the phrase arranged marriage now with astronomy. How did we get to that arranged marriage? What is that path, and what makes it so?
Right. So in Israel, there is obligatory military service at age 18, and I basically was given, since I was good also in physics, I was given the opportunity to go to an elite program that trains physicists and mathematicians for the defense of the country. And rather than running in the field, I thought that's closer to philosophy. So I did that, and I got my PhD at age 24. And I also led a new project that was funded by the Star Wars initiative in the mid-1980s of President Reagan. And that brought me to Washington, D.C. And in one of the visits, I visited the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton and met Freeman Dyson, who introduced me to an astrophysicist, John Bacall. And he basically made a gamble. He told me, I'm offering you a 5-year fellowship under the condition that you will switch to astrophysics. And, it sounded like an offer I cannot refuse, like in The Godfather. I cannot turn it down, and I accepted it. And then after that, I was offered a faculty position at Harvard. Again, I couldn't refuse that. Always in the back of my mind was the option of going back to the farm, because so I was not stressed out about the possibility of not getting tenure at Harvard. And I was tenured 3 years later. And at that point, it was a bit late for me to say, okay, hold on, I really want to do philosophy. So I said, okay, I'll accept that verdict now that I got this rare appointment, and try to make the best out of it. And that's pretty much my story.
And looking at your story now, you're coming off the heels of I couldn't count them. I think you said 500, more than 500 interviews you've done over the past 3 months. But you've talked about the importance of not having a social media presence. But your voice, your face has been out there, podcasts, radio, TV, everywhere from Joe Rogan Experience to Fox News. You are not turning down interviews. What's the importance of saying yes to that and having conversation with these audiences? Because that's got to, number one, to me, seem demanding and exhausting to you. But then number two, what's the give and take of being able to have that kind of dialogue on a diverse array of platforms, as opposed to trying to hash this out in social media?
Well, first, I should say it was not expected. And my literary agent said, you are about to appear in the Joe Rogan show in a month. Make sure that you have a good breakfast. Eat a lot of bread in the morning. And I said, I'm on a low carb diet, but I'll do my best. Don't worry. And she didn't really anticipate that just a couple of weeks later, I would basically be on a nonstop set of interviews from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. for 3 months, every day in a row. One after the other. And that was possible because of the pandemic. If it were normal times, I would have to travel to studios, to book tours, to all kinds of places around the world. But this way, I could stay at home in my home office that you see and go from one corner of the world to the other. And that was an unusual experience. And the way I viewed it is as an opportunity to communicate the excitement in doing science. And it's an opportunity you're not given every day, to have 500 interviews over 3 months. And I just try to explain how science is done. It's not the way that people often hear about, where scientists just, come up with the truth immediately. But in fact, it's a process. It's a process of learning. And many times the evidence is not sufficient for us to reach a conclusion. And so we entertain multiple possibilities. That's how the sausage is being made. The king, the emperor has no clothes. Many times, most of the time, it's a process of learning. We are not sure about how to interpret the data. And the public should know about it. And I told the publisher that my goal is really to convince at least one person around the world to become a scientist. And if that happens, I will be satisfied. And as it turns out, I got an email from Malawi, from a woman saying, I read your book, it's great, and I decided that I might want to become an astronomer. And I invited her to visit us at Harvard and to apply to our program. And I got an email from an undergraduate in Colombia in Latin America, and she said, reading about your work changed my life. And so I get a dozen of such emails every day, and that's extremely satisfying, because what I really wanted to accomplish is to convey an authentic message about how science is done and why science should be exciting. You see, if scientists pursue their honors and elevate their image, they also create this impression that it's the occupation of the elite, that people are standing on a pedestal as scientists relative to the rest of the public, and they are lecturing the public what to do and what the truth is. And that should not be the case. We should be in a conversation. Actually, science is a way of life. Whenever I have a problem at home, if the pipe gets clogged and I invite a plumber, I approach that problem in exactly the same way as I approach the question of what is the dark matter in the universe, or what is inside the black hole. It's exactly the same way. You look at the clues, you try to find some more clues, some evidence, and given the evidence you have, you come up with possible explanations. And eventually something really works out. And, that's, so science is a way of life, and there is no pedestal.
And one of the things that I think is remarkable about how you teach science and explain science is your ability to use metaphor and to help people that perhaps aren't as scientifically inclined like myself to understand that. And one of the ones that I valued that I've heard you use before, and I'd like you to explain here, is you likened Umamumamu to an iPhone being shown to cave people who would simply mistake it as a rock or a set of rocks. Why is this analogy, this analog, so important to our understanding of Umamumamu as you see it?
Well, the reason is simple, because we tend to believe that whatever we see must reflect our prior notions. So these cave people are used to playing with rocks, and if you show them a cell phone, indeed they will think it's a shiny rock. But if the cave people are a little more open-minded and they think about their experience as a learning experience, then they might start to play with that phone and get more evidence about what it can do, and learn that it's actually not a rock, it's something more sophisticated. And there is another example of the Mayan culture. When I visited Mexico, I went to Chichen Itza, which used to be an important Mayan city, and the tour guide was bragging that the Mayans had astronomers as the highest level in society. They were called astronomer priests. And I tried to figure out why were, nowadays nobody cares about astronomer. And the answer was that they were monitoring the motions of planets and stars on the sky, because the leaders, the political leaders at the time, thought that they can forecast the outcome of a war, for example, by the location of Mars or other celestial objects. And as a result, they wanted to know with great precision where these objects would be at the time that they go out to war. And unfortunately, now we know that the outcome of a war has nothing to do with the location of Mars or Jupiter or the sun or whatever. Because there is no causal connection between those. And because they have this notion, which we now know to be false, they did not use their data, which was exquisite, collected over thousands of years. They didn't use it to derive Newton's law of motion, of gravity, based on the motion of the planets. So what I'm trying to say is that you can collect as much data as you want, but if you are stuck in your old way of thinking, if you are looking at the data with a prejudice, you will not understand it.
I appreciate that, Dr. Loeb, and I'm going to take a minute to head into the audience questions and ask a few from folks who are tuning in tonight. And I want to start with one that's thinking about the James Webb Space Telescope. and thinking about what it might do to advance our understanding. This person's asking, how significant will the hopefully successful launch of the James Webb Space Telescope be for the advancement of the search for exoplanets and extraterrestrial life? Will it be a game changer, they put that in quotes, or more of an evolutionary step?
So I was actually on the scientific advisory committee for the James Webb Space Telescope when it was just conceived. That was in the mid-1990s. And back then, we thought of it as a way of learning about the first stars, the first galaxies, sort of the scientific version of the story of Genesis. That was the main objective of this telescope because it is sensitive to infrared light. And when you look at the very far away objects, they suffer a lot of redshift. So the light that is emitted in the visible band its wavelength is stretched into the infrared. And this telescope is great at finding very distant galaxies or stars. But at the same time, since then, there was the discovery in 1995 of the first exoplanet, hot Jupiter around a sun-like star. And then after that, the entire field of exoplanets was opened up. And now, indeed, the James Webb Space Telescope can help us learn more about those exoplanets. As far as I can tell, given its capabilities, it will advance our knowledge. I mean, no doubt about it. But it's not obvious that it will be revolutionary. Of course, it's difficult to tell, to forecast such things, and it's possible that we'll find things we never imagined. So I would say it's likely to advance our knowledge on many frontiers. Even the first galaxies, by now we have some data that gives us a sketch of what happened in the first billion years after the Big Bang. So it's not obvious that it will revolutionize our understanding, but I hope it will. I hope it will find things we haven't expected. With respect to the search for intelligent life, it could, for example, search, and I'm working on a paper right now, could search for example, for city lights, artificial lights on the night side of Proxima b, or search for evidence of an atmosphere around the planet Proxima b, or search for some types of molecules in the atmospheres of other planets that may indicate that maybe there is life on them. But that would take a lot of effort. It will not come immediately. So we just have to wait and see. If we look at the example of the Hubble Space Telescope, its biggest accomplishments were not forecasted. So I'm very much hopeful that we will find things we haven't expected.
I appreciate that, and I want to take another audience question, and I think this one is thinking about how much, when we think of extraterrestrial life, we think of how much we don't know and declassified information. This person's asking, what are your thoughts on all of the recently declassified videos of unidentified aerial phenomenon? Is there a reason to study this further or not?
Yeah, so we will hear, hopefully within a month, from a report prepared by the Pentagon to Congress about all these unidentified aerial phenomena that were talked about over the years, and primarily reported by military personnel, either pilots or Navy people. And my take on that is that these are intriguing, but not. It's difficult to decide how to interpret them because they were not using the very best instruments that you can use. So my approach to this is one can design an experiment where you deploy the very best cameras we have, the very best audio sensors in the same locations where the reports came from, and in an open way, look for unusual phenomena there. That would be a much better way to resolve what these reports are all about than to argue about it. Because science is all about reproducibility of results. If you can't reproduce the results, you never know if they're right or not. There is this biblical story about Abraham that heard the voice of God telling him to sacrifice his only son. And if Abraham had a cell phone with a voice memo up, he could have pressed the button and recorded God. and then we would all know that this really happened. Otherwise, you have to decide whether to believe or not to believe the eyewitness testimony. So my take is, let's think about the future rather than about the past. Let's deploy our best instrumentation in a controlled way and make a scientific experiment out of it.
Thank you for that, Dr. Loeb. Another one from the audience. This person starts with, "This is a fascinating subject," and they've really enjoyed your presentation, even though some of it was above their head, they admit. Their question, though, is looking at what you think, if you have any sense of a timeline, when in the future humans might encounter extraterrestrials, or they might encounter us. And then we have a whole host of questions, and I'm going to work my best here to wrap them into one. People grappling with in the Q&A section, should we assume they're benevolent, benign? Should we assume that they are looking for energy sources and that they are smarter than us, and if they find us first? So there's a lot going on in the audience Q&A around that, and I think that's because people are taking this seriously with you and looking at this possibility. So number one, do we have a timeline based on what you've seen so far in your research of when we might expect to encounter something else again that gives us a sense of the existence of extraterrestrial life? And then how do we start to grapple with our assumptions? Benign, benevolent, not so.
Right. So I think Oumuamua is a wake-up call for us to look at all the objects that we identify coming from outside the solar system, as if they were objects coming to our backyard from the street. And we can learn about the street by examining them and looking for plastic bottles among all the natural rocks among them. And we just need to examine these objects. And if we do that, I would not be surprised if during our lifetime we will find something unusual, just like Oumuamua, that we can take a photograph of and it would look artificial. So I think if we search, we might find it. And by search, I mean investing funds at the level of $1 billion, because when we search for dark matter, that's roughly what we invested so far. We don't know what most of the matter in the universe is, but we are still searching for specific types of particles, and nobody sees it as a failure if we haven't found it yet, because it's worth trying. But in the search for technological relics, we invested 1,000 times less funds. So how can we hope to find anything if we don't fund this search, if we don't do it? It's a self-fulfilling prophecy not to find extraordinary evidence if you don't search for it. Just like stepping on the grass and saying, look, the grass doesn't grow. So I think funding and bringing it to the mainstream of astronomy is very much in place and should happen, because it's a more important question that the public cares about than the nature of the dark matter. So if we ever find, my guess is that it will most likely be technological equipment, because traveling through the vast space in between stars is a very long journey, and also it offers a lot of risks for biological creatures. So I would be really surprised if we establish real contact with a living, intelligent being. We might find microbes, even on Mars or elsewhere, in Enceladus. But these, of course, have no implication as to the question of whether we're the smartest kid on the block. So my guess is, with respect to intelligent technological civilizations, we are most likely to find equipment out there. And with respect to the issue of risk, when you go out in the wilderness, you better be quiet and listen rather than speak out, because you never know whether there are predators out there. And unfortunately, we were not smart enough. We were broadcasting for about 100 years, and the radio signals we sent out reached 100 light years. And if there is any technological civilization that has radio telescopes within that distance, they already know about us. Now, with a chemical rocket, it will take them 1 million years to traverse 100 light years. So we might have some time left before they reach us. But the clock is ticking. And I don't know what to expect, because on the one hand, you might think that naturally those that survive have a more peaceful attitude. But on the other hand, if you look at the history of humans, many times cultures that were quite aggressive and colonial prevailed. So it's really difficult to forecast that. And I think, once again, we should not have a prejudice, and we should be wise in the sense of listening before speaking out.
And I think maybe that's some of that cosmic modesty that we are learning now that we didn't know of 100 years ago when we started to send our signal out, not realizing what else might be out there and how it might call back to us. But if I hear you clearly, I think that what I take away here is we're much more likely to encounter equipment before we encounter some actual life form. And we've got several questions in the Q&A from the audience, and I think people are grappling with science fiction and popular culture's role in this conversation. And you've said in interviews before, I like science and I like fiction separately. So I'm sure you're tired of being asked at this point, whether you find Star Trek, Star Wars, or the Marvel Universe or Battlestar Galactica more accurate. But what role does science fiction play in popular culture in trying to bring us to these topics and to try to work to understand them? And I guess be attracted to them at the very least, and then do something more with it. What is the role you see for science fiction and popular culture in trying to get people to warm to these conversations?
Yeah, we're pretty much limited in our imagination by what we witness, by what we experience. And what science fiction does, which is extremely important, is expand our imagination beyond what we are used to. And, on a number of occasions, science fiction writers forecasted our technological future. And that's extremely important. And because in a way, if you meet a civilization that predated us, a technological civilization that advanced much beyond what we currently have, then it represents our future. And trying to imagine the future is a skill that most of us do not have. And so science fiction writers play a very important role. And I actually have a favorite film called Arrival that I really admired, because it doesn't make many mistakes, or none at all, about the science. But it talks about a very important philosophical question of communication, how to exchange information, what is the meaning of when you get a signal, how do you figure it out? It's sort of like code breaking in the military of an enemy if you don't know what it means. The film addresses that, and it so happens that a couple of weeks ago, one of the people I spoke with was the producer of this film that told me that he enjoyed very much my book, and wanted to speak with me about it. And I should say that I had a lot of interest from filmmakers and producers. There were about 25 of them that approached me with interest in the book. So I told him that, in fact, I was his admirer to start with before he was able to read my book. And I do think that there is an interplay between what we imagine and what science fiction is all about. And as a result, we cannot search for things that we cannot imagine. So as soon as we developed radio technology, we started looking for signals from space. And to me, the experience with light sails allowed me to imagine the possibility that Oumuamua is a light sail. So I confess that I'm also limited by the same boundaries. And thanks to some very imaginative individuals, we can dream about things that may exist out there, but we haven't seen yet.
I want to come back to the light sails in 1 second because we have an audience question about that. But if the book is turned into a movie, are you playing yourself, or do you have an actor in mind that you'd like to cast if you're the casting director?
Well, I told my literary agent that if it happens, I want Brad Pitt to play my role, but that was just a joke. It's most likely to turn into a documentary than a feature film. Given the content of the book, and in that case, it's likely to, I'm likely to be there. But we shall see how it develops. We're currently in the process of getting it to fruition.
Well, I think you've got a lot of fans in the audience today that would champion for that. So if we can help get this book turned into a film, we're with you. Coming back to the light sails, as we're almost out of time, this person is asking just to recapture that again, give us an update where you are, because they're looking at space travel through space, and that's what you're looking at there, to overcome the great distances and to be able to travel more quickly than chemical propelled methods. And so where are we today with light sail technology?
Right. So we are still at the very first steps, in the sense that we demonstrated it works. I mean, the Planetary Society launched the LightSail 2 that was pushed by reflecting sunlight. And in terms of Starshot, the project that I'm involved in, we're currently working on the laser technology, on the LightSail material choice, and also on the communication challenge at great distances. And we're currently at a point where we're trying to assess any showstoppers. And that includes the price. You know, if it's too expensive, it wouldn't happen. So I would say that we are still a decade away, at least, from demonstrating the technology that it actually works. But every long journey takes a while, and we have to start now so that our descendants will be able to benefit from this technology.
And so as we're nearing the end here, in your book, you write, the most egregious error we can make is not to take this possibility seriously enough. That is what you're arguing, the thrust of your argument. Do you find now that people have had time to sit with the book? It's been made into 28 editions, 25 languages it's been translated into. Are people taking this more seriously that the books come out? How has this advanced the conversation around extraterrestrial life?
Oh, definitely. People in the public outside academia are taking it very seriously. And the issue is really within academia. And I'm not sure I can report about progress there because the pushback is still out there. And unfortunately, you know, I just don't see as much progress over there. But my hope is that eventually, you know, if we get a photograph, I will be able to convince anyone that looks at the photograph that this might not be a rock. If we see another object of the same class and we see it, we know about it a year in advance, so we can launch a spacecraft that will carry a camera that will take a close-up photo of it. And it's really the question of whether this kind of a project will be funded. Because if we don't do it, then obviously we'll not have the evidence. So my real concern is that by having a prejudice, we will keep our ignorance, just like the philosophers that refused to look through Galileo's telescope and put him in house arrest. Obviously, you know, reality doesn't care about whether we ignore it or not. You know, whether we have neighbors or not on the cosmic street doesn't depend on whether we look through our windows. You know, we can shut off the windows and say there is nobody out there, but that, you know, that's just like the philosophers saying, no, the sun moves around the earth. You know, reality doesn't really care about it. And I think knowledge, scientific knowledge, is extremely important in allowing us to plan our future. Because if you close yourself off at home and say, I don't want to hear about the world, you might think that you can live your life. But guess what? Even if you get your food through the front door, what happened in Wuhan, China, affects you ultimately. And if you don't know about it because you don't read the news, you'll be surprised. And, you know, the dinosaurs were surprised by a giant rock the size of Manhattan Island that appeared 66 million years ago and killed them, and killed also 3/4 of our life forms on Earth. So we better know about our bigger environment, and science is the way to learn about it.
And final audience question, pointing out that just days ago, a NASA spacecraft heard a hum outside of our solar system. And I promise we didn't schedule this talk knowing that that was going to happen just days before you're appearing. Our audience members asking for any reaction on what NASA has heard in this hum outside of our solar system.
I'm not sure. I actually haven't seen that report. There was back in December another report of hearing a radio signal from the direction of Proxima Centauri. That turned out to be just interference near the telescope in Australia, but I haven't seen the details of the hum from NASA. I have to look into that.
And Dr. Loeb, I want to end not with a question here, but a note of appreciation from one of our scholars in residence here at the Jefferson Educational Society, Dr. David Frew, who noted that it's the work of scientists like you that have inspired his grandson, Dr. Noah Charles, out of Ohio State University, to study physics and astronomy. So he is thanking you, and I want to give a thanks too to Dr. Noah Charles, because he's created a project at Ohio State University to help get more of the BIPOC community involved in STEM education during his time there. And so excited to share that note, because this has been such an inspiration to all of us. So Dr. Avi Loeb, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, the energy, and the effort to join us here for this conversation. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for hosting me, and you made my day with this note.
It's a wonderful note, and it's been a wonderful program. Folks, I want to again thank Dr. Avi Loeb, the author of the acclaimed Extraterrestrial, the First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, which is available for purchase. We've got links on our website at jeserie.org. Head over there, you'll find that. Thank you for your time, your energy, your effort, all of your work, being so gracious with your time, sharing it with us. And of course, the thanks goes out to our entire JES team under the leadership of our president, Dr. Ferky Faradi, and to the JES Board of Trustees under the leadership of our chairwoman, Joyce Savacchio, and to all of our event sponsors, Erie Insurance, Erie News Now, WQLM Public Media, the American Tapestry Project, and to our Global Summit event partner, the City Club of Cleveland. And of course, to all of you watching along at home, thank you for tuning in. These programs, these discussions, the exchange of information and ideas would not be possible without you. So thank you, folks. For more information about the JES, including how to register for additional Global Summit events you see on your screen right there, do visit that website, jeserie.org. There you're also going to find videos of past presentations available to stream on demand and publications, including reports, essays, and timely writings, as well as information about other JES initiatives, such as our Civic Leadership Academy and our Ramey Fellows program. And be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For the Jefferson Educational Society, I'm Ben Speggen. Be safe, be sound, and thanks for listening and learning with us.